Deep in the Appalachian wilderness, beyond the maps and forgotten by time, lies a hollow where echoes refuse to die. In 1965, a state investigator named Richard Henley followed rumors of sons who had never spoken a word, not because they were mute, but because generations of their bloodline had been twisted by isolation and the relentless insistence of their forefathers. What he found was a lineage of men, fathers, sons, brothers, who had lived apart from the world for over a century. Their faces looked eerily alike, their skulls malformed, their speech erased. They did not welcome him as men do. They circled him like beasts, grunting, gesturing, surviving. How does a proud line of men collapse into silence and shadows? How many generations does it take to turn men into something less than men? Tonight, we open that hidden gate and walk down the path no map dares to mark. Before we begin, if you want more stories that uncover the strangest, darkest corners of forgotten history, hit like, subscribe for more, and share this with a friend. Drop a comment. Would you have stepped into that hollow or turned back? The Appalachian Mountains held many secrets, but none so unsettling as the hollow Richard Henley found in the summer of 1965. He followed whispers of sons who had never spoken, where only men had lived for generations. Richard, a hardened state investigator known for tackling forgotten cases in remote places, drove a government truck down a path erased from maps. His orders were simple: verify the reports of silent boys and document whatever truth waited. The road disappeared beneath overgrown pines, roots clutching at his tires like skeletal fingers. He stepped out, boots sinking into damp soil, and scanned the shadowed tree line where rumors claimed a lost lineage of men lingered. There were no women waiting in this place. There never had been. The line traced back to a man named Jeremiah Whitman, a self-proclaimed patriarch who had once claimed this isolated land for his sons, his brothers, and their descendants. Richard followed a crooked fence half buried in moss. Rusted wire rattled in the wind, and a gate leaned open like a warning. Beyond it stretched a clearing where no modern sound belonged, only the hush of forgotten lives. The first shelter he saw was a leaning cabin, walls patched with scavenged metal and animal hides. No curtains, no softness, only rough work of calloused hands. Here men had built, eaten, fought, and fallen. Movement stirred. From the trees emerged figures, lean, ragged, barefoot. Their clothes were scraps. Their eyes glinted with a hunger that was not for food alone. Sons, brothers, fathers. Their faces bore the same crooked jaw. They circled him without a word, low grunts rolling from their throats like distant thunder. Some crouched, knuckles brushing dirt, nostrils flaring. They moved like a hunting pack, assessing if this stranger was threat or prey. Richard spoke, voice steady. "I'm here to help. I'm with the state." But his words fell dead in the hollow. Not a man among them answered. Heads tilted, lips parted, only breath escaped. Their silence was not defiance. It was absence. Generations of isolation had stripped them of language, leaving only guttural signals passed from father to son, uncle to nephew, until words became echoes of a forgotten world. Richard's training told him to retreat, yet his duty anchored him. These men were the remnants of a vow, to keep their bloodline untouched by outsiders, a vow whispered by Jeremiah Whitman over a century ago. The ground smelled of smoke and raw earth. Bones littered a pit where something had been cooked or torn apart without flame. Tools were primitive: sharpened sticks, rusted saws, a single dented pot lying empty by a log. He noticed the sameness in their faces: eyes set too close, brows heavy, skulls misshapen like clay pressed too many times. It was as if the same man had been copied through each generation of sons. No women had ever stepped here to bear them. No daughters had ever been raised to change their path. Only brothers joined with brothers' offspring, uncles with nephews, fathers with sons grown too soon. One of the older men stepped forward, spine curved, beard tangled like roots. He pointed toward a sagging structure where an ancient portrait hung. A line of male faces, each almost identical, stretching back 7 generations. Richard felt the weight of history pressing from that portrait. Each face carried the same cold stare, the same jawline, the same thinning lips. Men who had chosen separation over progress and purity over survival. A chill crawled through the clearing as the wind shifted. Somewhere deeper in the hollow, a low hum began. Not speech, not song, but the shared breath of men who no longer remembered what words could do. He reached for his notebook, pen scratching as he described the scene. No females present. Male only, lineage confirmed, condition severe, communication absent. The men watched, nostrils flaring at the scent of ink, fingers twitching like curious predators. Richard knew this was only the surface. Beyond the trees lay deeper truths. How they lived, how they ruled themselves, how 7 generations of men had survived without the world ever seeing them as human. As dusk fell, their shapes melted into the forest, leaving him alone with the portrait, the cabin, and the echo of guttural sounds fading into the night. The hollow was not abandoned, it was waiting. Richard marked his path back with strips of cloth, knowing he would return with others. But tonight, as darkness wrapped the hollow, he understood the first rule here. No woman had ever belonged, and none ever would. The origins of the hollow's curse began with one man, Jeremiah Whitman. In 1823, he purchased 847 acres of mountain land for a handful of coins, swearing it would be a sanctuary for his sons and their descendants. Jeremiah was no ordinary settler. He preached his own version of purity, that the world beyond the ridges bred weakness, and only men bound by shared blood could remain untainted. Outsiders were considered corruption, unworthy of their lineage. He raised 12 sons in a cabin of rough-hewn logs, far from towns, far from any law but his own. Each boy grew beneath the stern gaze of a father who forbade outside influence. When his eldest, Thomas, came of age in 1845, no neighboring homestead offered a match. The nearest settlement lay 3 days' journey through dangerous passes. Jeremiah faced a choice: seek outsiders, or keep the bloodline within his control. He chose the latter. He wed Thomas to his own brother's son, claiming their union would keep the blood pure of strangers. The ceremony was held beneath pine shadows, witnessed only by brothers and fathers sworn to secrecy. This was no accident. It was doctrine. Jeremiah wrote in the family Bible, Thomas joined to Nathaniel, pure of blood, bound by God, May 15, 1845. That Bible would later become the key evidence of his vow. From that union came the second generation, boys whose features bore a doubled stamp of sameness. Their eyes too near, their jaws set like copies. Yet Jeremiah declared them blessed, untouched by the world's decay. As years passed, brothers joined with brothers' sons, uncles claimed nephews, fathers shared bonds with their maturing heirs. There were no daughters to change the course, no mothers to plead for different futures. By the third generation, whispers began among distant loggers and traders who passed near the hollow. They spoke of strange men glimpsed at dusk, their gaits uneven, their voices absent or reduced to growls. Jeremiah, long-bearded and unbending, taught that words carried lies, but blood carried truth. Speech began to fade, replaced by gestures, grunts, and low humming sounds passed from father to son like inherited scars. The men of the hollow no longer sought trade or counsel. They hunted their own game, forged their own tools, and buried their dead beneath stones marked only with carved initials, always of men, never of women. By 1875, when the third generation reached maturity, deformities had taken deeper root. Foreheads sloped, limbs bent strangely, skulls stretched narrow. Yet still, Jeremiah's descendants refused outside help, citing his law. "Only the blood of men sustains us." Doctors in nearby counties warned of madness in isolation. One physician, Dr. Edmund Curthers, dared venture into the hollow. His notes described boys who grunted like wild animals, unable to form a single coherent sentence. He wrote, "Their eyes follow, their hands claw, their mouths strain, yet no word escapes. The eldest, near 16, communicates only with guttural clicks. The fathers guard them, proud of what remains." Rather than alarm them, these observations hardened the line. The men saw doctors as predators, scheming to dilute their blood. They sealed paths with fallen trees, patrolled ridges, and warned their sons, "Outsiders bring ruin." Thus the hollow became its own kingdom, ruled by strength, by closeness of blood, by silence. Jeremiah's vision had birthed a dynasty of men cut off from the march of mankind. What began as a belief in strength had sown seeds of decay. With each generation, the men bore heavier deformities, their world shrinking until only trees, stone, and the echo of their patriarch's law remained. Richard Henley, standing in that hollow a century later, would see the end of this beginning, the fruit of Jeremiah's vow, carried through sons who had never known a world with women. The third chapter in the hollow's grim legacy began as the sons of the second generation matured. Brothers, uncles, and fathers lived in a closed loop, bound by the law of Jeremiah Whitman. "Our blood alone sustains." What outsiders called inbreeding, they named sanctification. Each union bound a nephew to an uncle, a son to a father's line, a cousin to a cousin, never a stranger. Their world permitted only men, and only men carried it forward. These unions were not chosen with affection. They were commanded as duty. A father might direct two young men to pair, claiming the mountain demanded it. Sons obeyed, not knowing any other kind of bond. Over decades, the faces became mirrors. The same nose, the same bent jawline, the same narrow skull repeated across fields and generations. The hollow began to echo with the same voices, though those voices spoke less with each passing year. Hunting replaced trade. Barter with nearby towns ceased entirely. The men learned to trap rabbits, snare foxes, and break the necks of deer with raw hands. Their tools rusted, their axes dulled, their world grew smaller. Camps replaced cabins. The once proud homestead rotted into splintered timber, but the men did not rebuild. They slept in lean-tos beneath hides of animals they had torn open with their own strength, sharing warmth like wolves. By the 1880s, language had faded to fragments. A grunt could mean hunger, a hiss could mean threat, a low hum meant obedience. Fathers taught sons these sounds as if they were sacred verses. Neighbors who ventured too near spoke of figures watching from tree lines, moving in strange half-crouches, their eyes reflecting moonlight like beasts. The men did not attack at first. They observed, waited, and vanished. Census takers marked the land as barren, though they saw smoke rising. One officer wrote in his margin, "All present were male, no coherent speech. Advise future teams to avoid contact, risk unclear." The line's deformities deepened. Limbs warped unevenly. Some arms hung longer than the other, fingers fused or split into claw-like shapes. Yet still the men bred sons, convinced they preserved something holy in their blood. It was no longer purity they preserved. It was repetition. The same patterns, the same errors, looping endlessly from uncle to nephew, father to son, brother to brother, as though the mountain had written its own curse. Occasionally, a stranger would vanish near the hollow. Hunters told of seeing men with crooked spines stalking deer silently, their teeth flashing in firelight, their hands slick with fresh kill, their eyes void of reason. The men learned to hide what they had become. Paths were obscured with fallen trees. Footprints were brushed out. Their borders were drawn not with fences but with silence, a silence outsiders could feel pressing on their chests. By 1900, 14 men lived within the hollow, ranging from frail elders to fierce young hunters. None had wives, none had daughters, none had ever heard the lullaby of a woman's voice. Instead, they knew only the low commands of older men, the crack of a stick that meant punishment, the guttural summons that called them to share meat. Their world was not one of growth, but survival. What once began as a vision of strength had become a cycle of weakness. The boundaries they set to protect themselves had become their prison, and each son born into it inherited both the name and the doom. When Richard Henley would arrive generations later, he would not see monsters. He would see the product of decisions made by men who believed they could shape their world by excluding it entirely. By the dawn of the fourth generation, the men of the hollow no longer spoke in words. Language had slipped from their tongues like smoke carried off the ridge, leaving only fragments passed from father to son. Sons grunted to ask for food, clicked their tongues to signal danger, hissed when threatened. Fathers responded with gestures, a raised fist, a sharp whistle, a guttural hum. Speech, once a tool, had become a memory. The men moved in packs now, hunting together, sleeping in clusters near fireless pits. Ashes remained, but they rarely used flame. Meat was torn raw, bones cracked open for marrow, blood shared like ritual. Without language, no stories were told. The history of Jeremiah Whitman, the patriarch who had sealed them from the world, survived only as a portrait of stern-eyed men nailed to a warped cabin wall. Those who strayed too far never returned. Hunters from nearby ridges spoke of strange figures in the fog, long-armed silhouettes crouching low, watching, vanishing. They said the forest itself kept their names secret. The hollow echoed at night with sounds neither beast nor man should make. Low moans carried across the valley, followed by clicking bursts, as though the sons were speaking in a tongue lost before birth. Fathers disciplined sons with force, not reason. A blow to the shoulder meant silence. A kick to the ribs meant obedience. No man questioned the hierarchy. Strength decided everything, and weakness was left in the frost. Their shelters sagged with decay. Roofs of rotted timber bowed under rain. Walls leaned until the wind rattled them apart. Yet none of the men rebuilt. They had forgotten how hammers felt in their hands. Census records from 1900 listed only numbers. 14 males, ages uncertain. No names matched, for the script was illegible, scrawled by an officer who refused to return after hearing their guttural greetings. Travelers told of being followed by shadows that did not belong to wolves. Some claimed to see yellowed teeth glinting in moonlight. Others spoke of a boy who crawled on all fours, growling at a lantern's glow. The silent sons bred early, their bonds twisted by the rules their patriarch had left. Fathers claimed young sons when they reached their growth, declaring it duty to continue the line no matter the cost. Their eyes reflected not only the moon but the centuries of isolation behind them. Close-set, pale, and unblinking, they stared without recognition when strangers passed the outer ridges, as if men from another world. Dr. Edmund Curthers, who ventured once more in 1905, wrote, "I saw only men, no women, no families as the world knows them. They grunt, they snarl, they swarm when provoked." He left the hollow with trembling hands, warning the county, "This is no community. This is a lineage collapsing into instinct." But the county turned its eyes away. No one wished to claim responsibility for the sons. The fourth generation marked the point of no return. Language had not simply withered, it had rotted from within their blood, carved away by each forced union, each whispered vow to keep outsiders gone. And so, the hollow became a place of sounds instead of sentences, of gestures instead of agreements, of dominance instead of leadership. a kingdom of men stripped of the very gift that made them men. Richard Henley, years later, would hear their guttural songs under a summer moon and realize this was not silence born of choice. It was silence bred by blood, sealed over generations of men. Whispers about the hollow spread along the mountain trails like smoke caught in pine needles. Men who hunted near its borders spoke of shapes that watched them from the fog, always silent, always waiting. Fishermen claimed they heard low humming after dusk, drifting between trees like a warning. Some said the sounds were not calls but conversations. The strange language of sons, raised without words, passed from one man to another like a curse. Traveling salesmen, rare in those parts, left hurried reports in roadside inns. Torn branches, claw marks on bark, half-eaten rabbits left near their camps. They did not see the men. They felt them. One trapper, Jonas Creer, told of a night when his fire died without reason. He woke to find his snares empty and his boots missing. In the dark, he heard clicking from every direction. Those clicks were not the chatter of insects. They were the signals of the hollow's men. Brothers communicated in rhythm, like stones striking bone, each pulse carrying meaning deeper than words could reach. The county sheriff once organized a small patrol to investigate. 4 men entered the outer trail. Only 3 returned. The missing one, a deputy named Mason, was never seen again. His rifle was found cracked. The report described shadows that flanked them, moving faster than men should. They heard breathing, heavy and uneven, yet saw nothing clear. The pines whispered with each gust, hiding the silent suns among them. By then, the 5th generation had grown bold. They no longer merely observed, they stalked. Hunters found their kills dragged away. Camps were ransacked. Traps were sprung by unseen hands before dawn. Each generation had grown more feral, more detached from the world of men. The Hollow's sons did not fear outsiders. They studied them, circled them, tested their strength, and decided whether to let them leave. Census records had long ceased. Maps marked the land as unsettled. Locals marked it with superstition. Fathers told their sons to avoid that trail, to never chase game beyond the second ridge. The whispers grew into legend, that the Hollow's men could see in the dark, that they moved without sound, that their blood carried a sickness no outsider could cure. Few dared to challenge it. One winter, a group of loggers claimed to see figures crouching in the tree line, spines bent, arms dangling longer than natural. When they raised their lanterns, the shapes dissolved like smoke. The loggers left their tools behind and never returned. Their axes rusted where they fell, covered by snow, then pine needles, then the slow reclaiming hands of time. The Hollow devoured both steel and memory. Richard Henley would later read these accounts, each written by a different hand, each marked with the same warning. Only men within, no women, no language, no safety. The whispers in the pines were not myths. They were messages, carved by footsteps, lost boots, broken rifles. Every sound, every missing man, every echo told the same story. The Hollow watched, and it remembered. As the decades turned, the men of the Hollow became the night's presence. Not quite beasts, not quite men, but something that thrived in the space between, where outsiders dared not linger after dusk. By the 1940s, the 6th generation of the Hollow had grown into something that barely resembled the men who first carved this land. Their spines bent like branches under snow, their limbs stretched unevenly, their eyes burned pale. Every man born into that generation carried the weight of 7 decades of closed bloodlines. Sons were born to fathers who had been sons to their own uncles, and each union tightened the genetic snare around their lineage. Language was gone, not forgotten, erased. No son learned words, no father taught them. Instead, a series of clicks, hums, and guttural calls formed the only bridge between one man and another. They no longer worked as farmers or woodcutters. Their tools rusted to dust decades before. They survived by instinct, hunting deer, tearing rabbits apart raw, gnawing on roots when prey grew scarce in winter's grip. World War II sent recruiters into the mountains, searching for young men fit for service. One officer, Lieutenant James Hartwell, stepped into the hollow in 1943, the first official presence there in over 50 years. Hartwell's report, later sealed, described 20 men crouching in shadows, their bodies twisted, their eyes unblinking. "They sniffed my boots," he wrote. "Some moved on all fours. None spoke. None showed understanding of uniform or rank." The encounter unsettled him deeply. When he offered them rations, they fought over the packets like wolves, tearing the paper with their teeth. No word of thanks, no sign of recognition, only snarls. This report triggered what the government quietly called the Kentucky situation. Teams of men, doctors, soldiers, and investigators planned a covert study. Their goal was not rescue, it was observation. Researchers approached from 3 sides of the ridge. They found crude shelters made of rusted tin, broken branches, and animal bones tied with sinew. No furniture, no tools, only the bare imprint of male existence. The 6th generation was unlike any before. Their skulls elongated, their teeth jagged, some with bony protrusions forming at the base of their spines. Whispers among the investigators called them reversions. Hierarchy had collapsed. No longer did elder brothers lead. Each man fought for himself, over scraps, over shelter, over the right to reproduce with the sons he claimed as his continuation. Reports described violent dominance rituals. A stronger man striking a younger one, dragging him by the neck to a clearing, forcing him into the cycle that had created them all. No protest, no refusal, only instinct. Supplies meant nothing. Firearms were left untouched, tools abandoned. They hunted with hands and stones, feeding on what they could catch. Winter took many, but always a few survived, thin and pale as frost. The government team left quietly, taking notes, mapping paths, photographing the faces of men who stared into cameras without comprehension. Their findings never reached the public. Too dangerous, too strange, too far gone. By the time Richard Henley would arrive 2 decades later, the 6th generation was fading, their bodies breaking down faster than they could breed new sons. But their presence still clung to the trees like ash. And still, no women had ever entered that lineage. No daughters born, no wives taken, no outsiders accepted. It was a world of men, shaped by their own hands, crushed by their own vow. By the summer of 1965, the hollow had become a sealed tomb of living men. 7 generations had passed since Jeremiah Whitman first claimed the land for his sons, and the remnants of that vow still breathed. Richard Henley returned with a team, all men, all sworn to secrecy. Soldiers carried rifles, doctors carried satchels, and officers carried orders. Retrieve the remaining sons, document their condition, and erase the place from memory. They entered at dawn, boots sinking into damp moss, rifles raised against shadows. No women had ever stepped here, and none would. Every figure waiting in the clearing was male, warped by decades of closed bloodlines. The men emerged from their shelters in silence. Some crouched, some limped, some dragged twisted limbs behind them. Their eyes followed the team like a pack studying prey, yet they neither fled nor approached. Henley offered food first, hard biscuits and salted meat. The strongest of the hollow's men lunged, tearing the rations open with their teeth. The weaker sons waited, their ribs showing beneath tattered hides. Doctors tried to speak, to gesture, to coax some trace of language. The men only clicked their tongues and hissed, communicating among themselves with signals learned from generations of fathers and uncles before them. Operation Mountain Recovery was not a rescue. It was containment. The government feared contamination, a bloodline so twisted it might unsettle the world if allowed to wander. Orders were to remove, study, and silence. The sons were rounded into trucks. Some fought, clawing at metal, biting gloved hands. Others stared blankly, as if capture meant nothing. No plea, no protest, only guttural noises that echoed in the steel walls. Henley walked the hollow one last time. He saw crude shelters built from bones and tin, pits filled with blackened stones, portraits of bearded men nailed crooked on warped boards, faces repeating across a century. Each portrait held the same features: narrow skulls, close-set eyes, thin lips. The lineage had become a mirror hall of its own making. Every son the echo of a father, every father the shadow of an uncle. The land was fenced, marked as a restricted zone. Fires consumed what shelters remained. No grave was tended, no stone left standing. The hollow was to become a scar erased from the map. Those taken were brought to a secured facility in Lexington. Doctors examined their blood, their bones, their minds. They found unraveling chromosomes, malformed organs, and brains that processed only hunger, shelter, and dominance. The youngest sons could be taught to wash, to sit, to eat from plates. The eldest never changed. They paced, they growled, they struck at walls. Language did not return. It had been erased at the root. Government reports described them as living fossils of genetic collapse. Each man carried the cost of decisions made long before his birth, choices of fathers and grandfathers who sealed their bloodline against the world. Most did not live long. Their bodies failed by 40. Organs faltered, bones cracked under minor strain, teeth fell before youth had faded. The line was ending, not by mercy, but by exhaustion. Henley signed his final report with a heavy hand. All retrieved are male. No women recorded, no daughters known. Bloodline terminated through isolation. It would remain classified for decades, a secret buried in cold archives. And so, the hollow fell silent. Only the wind and the pines remembered the men who had once ruled it, their footsteps fading like smoke, their names never spoken again beyond the sealed reports. The hollow now lies empty. Where once sons grunted beneath crooked roofs, only pines sway in the wind, whispering over stones that bear no names. No laughter ever echoed here, only the breath of men long gone. After Operation Mountain Recovery, the land was fenced and marked as hazardous. Signs warned travelers away, though few dared venture near. Hunters passed quickly, eyes averted, recalling the legends of men who spoke without words. Government records labeled the site as a closed biological case. All who worked there, doctors, officers, handlers, were men sworn to secrecy. Their oaths outlived their careers, their reports sealed in iron drawers. The surviving sons lived out their years in isolation. Some paced sterile halls, others sat motionless by barred windows. They never learned speech, never knew the outside world, never called another man brother with meaning. Each carried the same face, close eyes, hollow cheeks, crooked teeth. They were the echo of one man's vow, Jeremiah Whitman's command that only men should build, breed, and bury within the hollow. By the 1980s, most were gone. Their bodies gave way early, their bones brittle as dry branches, their hearts failing before winter's third frost. None sired new sons beyond the compound walls. The land reclaimed their shelters. Rusted tin collapsed into soil, bone to dust. Portraits of stern men rotted where rain seeped through broken beams. No monument rose, only moss and silence. Local tales endured. Men at taverns told of hearing clicks in the wind, of seeing pale shapes move among the trees at night. Whether ghosts or echoes, no one followed long enough to know. The warning remained unspoken but felt. Isolation breeds rot. A line of men cut from the world had withered not because of invasion, but because of their own unbroken circle. Jeremiah's vision, meant to preserve strength, became a slow collapse. Each son bore the burden, each generation more twisted than the last, until the line itself crumbled under its own law. Richard Henley's final notes, declassified years later, described the hollow as a monument to human fragility. 7 generations of men, he wrote, and not one voice left to speak for them. No daughters had ever crossed that gate. No women had ever touched that soil. It remained a brotherhood without end, and therefore without future. The fences still stand, rusted but intact. The path remains hidden by pines. Some say the soil remembers that if a man stands too long within, he hears the hum of those who came before. The lesson is not buried. It lingers in the cold earth and the sealed reports. Cut yourself from the world, and the world forgets you. Close your blood, and your blood closes upon itself. The hollow teaches that men cannot thrive as shadows. Without bonds beyond their own circle, they become whispers, fading with each season until even the wind forgets their names. And so it ends, a tale of fathers and sons, brothers and uncles, a lineage of men who walled themselves away until their voices turned to ash and their legacy to silence.